We've received the going live from Lucinda. I don't know how many people are on otherwise, but Madam Mayor, do you want to provide the mayor's welcome?
Sure, I'd love to. I would love to know too, if someone wants to put over in the chat section how many people we have on the Citizens Academy tonight. That'd be great. I'd love to know. But welcome all of you who are taking the time to learn more about the city that you live in and call home, and to learn more about the city's response to the COVID crisis. I think that you're going to learn just how capable and top-notch the city staff is, and how prepared we have been to respond in case of emergency. I know that, I mean, as a resident of Fullerton, I have been so impressed with the leadership that our city throughout all departments has shown during really unprecedented times. So I encourage you to ask great questions and really take this as an opportunity to get to not only to get to know the city you live in better, but also to figure out how you can make a difference here, because each of us in our own way, I believe it's our responsibility to try to make a difference in our community here in Fullerton. And there are big, high profile ways that you can do that. And there are small, everyday ways that mean even more a lot of times. So thanks again for taking your time to do this. And I wish you the best session that you can have tonight.
Thank you, Mayor Fitzgerald. This is Antonia Graham. I am the Deputy City Manager, and I'm going to give you a quick overview of what our Citizens Academy is and what the next few weeks will look like. I would ask that we save all of our questions till the end. If you have questions, you can enter them. For those of you online, you can enter them into the chat box and we will answer them and have the appropriate staff person get you the answer. If you are live here in our council chambers, you can give one of our staff members your written question. They'll be passing out sheets for you to write down your questions. So this is our inaugural Citizens Academy, and really what it is, it will enable residents and business owners in the city to have a better understanding of what we do and how we do it, what kinds of services we provide. And it's going to really help us as a city tell you what we do, why we do it, and improve our communication and transparency with you, our residents. It will help you as a resident or business owner better understand what roles you can play in making our community great. So this is obviously a free program, and we have moved it virtually online. So bear with us, as this is normally an in-person program is what we envisioned it as. And over the next few weeks, you're going to learn about all of our city departments and really educate yourself on what every department does. You'll hear from our fire department, our police department, our public works department, our community and economic development department, and our library and parks and recreation, and our finance department, and the city manager's office. So we'll be meeting once a week here online, and for those of you that want to come in person, socially distanced, of course, on Thursday nights beginning from 5:30 to 8:30. We won't always go that long, but we want to ensure enough time for departments to tell you what they do and enable you to have questions. And each session, as I mentioned, is going to be focused on a city department and will be led by city staff. So you'll get to know the department director and all the division managers within that department. So this is just a quick overview. We'll send out these slides to all the participants so you can have a copy of this. Next week, we'll have the administration and the city manager's office. You'll learn about our legislative advocacy. Next, the library. You'll get probably a great virtual tour of our library and all of our great catalog of books and programs, parks and recreation, community and economic development, admin services, police, fire, and public works. And we'll end with a graduation here, hopefully in our council chambers. And so next I'd like to introduce our city manager, Ken Domer.
Thank you, Tony. And to everybody, both in the audience and kind of listening, and even to those who will be watching this, because it is being recorded, so we can replay it, because we do believe it will be a great informational tool. Thank you for joining. When we first launched this, and a lot of other cities do Citizens Academy, as Tony was mentioning, it truly is a way for interested residents to learn more about the city, to find out more about what we do internally. And, we were all kind of bummed when we had to postpone and kick this off due to the public health crisis. And then it dawned on us that, hey, why don't we use this public health crisis, and in particular tonight's subject about the Emergency Operations Center and how we responded to it, as kind of the kickoff, because it's been really fascinating to go through. I think, and I hope this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for many of us in the public sector to go through this. As you'll hear from our fire folks, there's a lot of planning when it comes to an EOC and a lot of rehearsals for earthquakes and everything else. I do remember about maybe 4.5, 5 years ago, we did a quick one-day issue on a pandemic, and it was utilizing our points of dispensing areas, and we use it as a flu shot kind of drive. It's been nothing like what reality is. And so it has been extremely interesting, to say so. But with that, so how did we get here, and what were some of the steps that the city did? When looking back at my email, there was a email from me to all city staff back on January 29th, and it talked about, there was a virus that was circulating in the, area of China, and that, just to be safe, make sure that if you're not feeling well, you stay home, feverish, the real basic symptoms that at the time we knew. And then also those kind of basic safeguards of, hey, wash your hands, and do a lot of hygienic issues so that, we're just being safe and on the watch. It wasn't until about, almost a month later, still some news going on, but what we were hearing at all levels was that, the United States was not having the virus present in a large scale. But it was around February 26th that, talking with the police chief and the fire chief and our HR director at the time, that, hey, there's a lot more going on. So let's go ahead and start ordering some sanitizer. We put sanitizer stations out, started ordering some masks, doing some basic stuff. And really from there, it seemed to go on a hyper stretch where it really quickened everything. So what we had decided was we needed a dry run of our Emergency Operations Center. And for those of you who have been involved with the city beforehand, you'll know that our EOC is actually over at our corporate yard, which is down in the 1500 block of Commonwealth. So we get out there to do a dry run, pull out the laptops and everything else, and we determined that technologically wise, we're not able to operate an EOC out there. It just wasn't going to work. So what we did is we moved it and activated it down in the basement of City Hall. So that was around, March 11th or so. By March 13th, things were really getting, from the federal government, from the state. So on the 13th, that's when the city sent out an email saying, hey, we're going to be canceling all public gatherings in accordance with state recommendations. And that was basically at the time, no gathering over 250 people. And then about 4 days later, it became no gathering 10 people. And during this time, we were very reactive, especially because we had weddings and other events booked at the Fullerton Community Center, some of our other community centers. And so we weren't in control of the issues that were going on, but we had to react and communicate with, both who had been renting issues and been participating in programs. So it was really kind of in a way, an exciting time, but a very active time. On March 17th, or March 16th, I proclaimed a local emergency under the powers of Chapter 2.8 of the Fullerton Municipal Code. the next day on March 17th, the city council actually ratified that as part of our process. And so that meant that we had a local state of emergency here in Fullerton, and that coincided with the county, and also the state had local emergencies going on too. A couple other items after that, the state earlier talked about, hey, with the stay-at-home orders, and you heard about the 5 Bay Area counties doing a stay-at-home, and then the county kind of did a quasi stay-at-home. LA County did something, and then the state came back and said, well, there is going to be a stay-at-home for the entire county. So the whole time we were digesting that information, looking at what we can do, and working with the city council to do a lot of things. So on March 26th, the city council passed the eviction moratorium. It includes residential and commercial. On April 24th, the city council is one of about 3 or 4 cities that had a requirement for face masks, not just in a business as an employee, but for the patrons. And now, as we know, as of this past Saturday, the entire county is under that face mask requirement too. So with that, I want to introduce Fire Chief Adam Lozier. He's going to talk to you about the Fullerton Emergency Operations Center and kind of run you through all that. And Chief, take it over.
Thanks, Dan. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Get kind of the behind the scenes look of what's been going on here in the city of Fullerton as we've responded to the pandemic, and all the moving parts, all the different chucking and jiving the city personnel have had to do in order to stay responsive to this, and keep not our citizens safe, but also our employees safe, and still keep up our city services to the best of our ability. So as far as the emergency management component is concerned, this is an example of the city as a whole and not just one department. And generally this dealing with emergencies lands primarily with your public safety, fire, police. It also deals with public works. But in the case where it's an emergency that overwhelms the resources of one or more departments in a city, we look at it more as a global impact to the organization of the city. That's where we open up an emergency operations center, and when that is opened up or began, the idea is that everything filters through an organization focused on dealing with that city incident. This incident happens to be a little bit more unique than the incidents that most of us in the fire department are used to seeing. Usually if there's an accident or a disaster, it's something tangible. You can see it. For example, when we had the earthquake about 5 or 6 years ago, the Whittier La Habra earthquake, there were things that we can see that was actual damage. We know we can go out there and solve that. Here, there wasn't anything. Most of us may still not know anybody that has contracted COVID. It really is something that's in the shadows. But without seeing it, we also had to make sure that we were prepared to handle if it did infiltrate our organization, if it infiltrated any of the organizations within the city, and if it started to spread within our first responders who are tasked out to obviously respond to this situation. We had to come up with plans to deal with that as well. So all of these are not unique to a large scale emergency, but when we're trying to deal with something we can't see, it makes it a little bit more challenging to get traction and to move it forward. And you can see that a lot in the way with the orders and the mechanisms by which they've been coming down internationally, federally, state, and locally. Things have changed a lot. They change every 24 hours. And sometimes to the good, sometimes to the maybe not so good, but it was up to this group, this emergency management, emergency operations center, to collect that information, digest it, and point the city in the best direction. So As Ken mentioned, we opened up our EOC basically the same day that we proclaimed this a disaster or natural medical emergency. And with that, the organization then is set in motion. And I'm going to introduce Division Chief Brandon Coatney. He is our EOC director. So he is the person that is in charge of overseeing this. I'm going to have him explain a little bit more of the dynamics of the EOC, and then he'll get into and pass the chain along to the different sections. So Chief Coatney, take it away.
All right, good evening, everyone. Once again, my name is Brandon Coatney. I'm going to take you through some of the operations here with the EOC and how we went through our activation process, and give you just a brief summarization of what the EOC is for and how we've dealt with this this pandemic so far. So going back to, can we go back to the previous slide there? Sorry about that. Just a brief history there. Obviously, with that emergency proclamation on the 16th, we activated our EOC. We activated to what we can consider a level 3 activation, which at that point, the level 3 is just that we are in preparation. It's not necessarily like on large events, we would be at a level 2 or a level 1 where we have the EOC fully staffed, 24 hours a day, operational periods where we're dealing with things coming at us at every second of the day. Those are what we would commonly see in large fires, earthquakes, civil, where we have any civil disturbances, anything like that, where we would be constantly up and running. So at this point, and what we started with was we were at a level 3 activation, which is a minimal activation. However, with a pandemic response, just as the city manager stated and the fire chief, it really put us. It's a very dynamic response, like to say the least, because in preparing for it. It's difficult to know exactly how it was going to hit our community, so we had to prepare for the worst. And one of the very first things we had to deal with was supply chains, as far as not only for our personnel, safety equipment, but we also had to be concerned about supply chains as far as food, water, and those critical services to the citizens in the city. So we had to develop many different pathways on the backside of this whole incident to be able to deal with any of those situations that would arise. So, and one of our main things is being able to deliver those services from the city. Is we also had to protect our employees to keep them from being affected by this pandemic and becoming ill, and how we were going to deal with any situations that would arise with that. If a number of our firefighters, if a number of our public works personnel, if a large number of our police officers were affected, how are we still going to deliver those services to the city? And those were what a majority of our labors were entailed at that point. So, but all in all, the main goal of our EOC when we opened it at that point was to maintain essential services to the citizens of the city, to make sure that we were able to sustain ourselves through this incident. So now we'll briefly talk about an EOC and what it's made of. So go ahead and advance to the next slide. So basically, with an EOC, which is the Emergency Operations Center, the primary functions are the 3 that you can see there. It's resource management, command and coordination, and then communications and information management. When we talk about resource management, just like the chief stated, when we are tasked with an incident that overwhelms one specific department, and it's going to take the response of more than one department or the whole city, it's important that we activate the EOC so that we have one central hub where the incident commanders and the people that are going to make decisions, so that we can have a united and coordinated response to all of these incidents, because we want to do the best good for the most amount of people. So that resource management becomes the primary function of the EOC. The command and coordination, that is where we place people in positions so that they're able to manage and not be overwhelmed at any given point during this response. We want them to be able to take in the information and the calls that are coming in for service and be able to respond to them correctly and utilize the most appropriate resources for that. So that command and coordination is a huge part of it. The communications and information management is also a huge part. That's all of our social media. That is how we get information in from a common resource, and that's either from our local area, and we'll talk about it a little bit in depth here coming up in the next couple slides, but how we coordinate with the county level, the state level, and the federal level. So we want to make sure that we're giving out as best as we can a unified message to the public so that they know how to operate, or they know how to respond correctly, or how to protect themselves during these incidents. Go ahead and advance to the next one. So with the incident management system, there's the three main guiding principles of that, and that is the flexibility. The EOC is designed to where it's flexible to a small event that only affects our city or one portion of our city, or something as large as this pandemic that affects, basically this is a global response. You know, we're talking about our country, but this was a global incident. It's very adaptable and it's scalable. As quick as we can expand this thing and make it large, we can also scale it back to accomplish the same goals. The standardization is all cities and major government agencies go through the training to know how to operate within this incident management system. And that's so that we can all operate together. We speak common terminology. We're able to deliver the best service possible. If we had just a bunch of different cities doing their own thing, that response is not going to be very good for the good of the betterment of all the people. We want to make sure that we're doing a united response to every incident. And then it's also that unity of effort. So we're coordinating with our neighbors, we're sharing resources when we can, and also within our city, we're sharing all of our resources to achieve a common objective. If we just had a bunch of people that were just going out and trying to help out, it becomes confusing. We don't know who's been helped or who hasn't. So that's why we use this system, is so that we bring all that information in and we send the resources out where they need to be. Okay, go ahead with the next slide. So basically the way our EOC has been set up, even though it's a level 3 activation, we built our whole EOC incident command structure to incorporate if this situation got much larger to a point where we would be operating in all areas. So this slide here demonstrates basically the command and general staff positions of the EOC. So at the top there, you see there's the EOC Unified Command. And we talk about Unified Command because this spans multiple agencies within our city. That Unified Command is going to be the city manager and the police chief and the fire chief. And they're the ones that are going to be communicating with all of our policymakers and our city council in the city to make those big decisions for the incident. All the support staff underneath there is where they're going to get that information and to get those services out to the citizens. So at one part there, you can see on the left side of that first part of the command staff is the EOC director. And that's a person that is going to be basically making sure that all parts of the EOC are up and running correctly, everything's running smoothly, people are communicating effectively, and that we're meeting the objectives that we need to. And then we have a web EOC coordinator, and that person is communicating with our operational area and above to ensure that we are getting all information and sharing all information that we need to with the operational area in the state level. Also, you'll see there's the safety officer. They're basically overseeing all of the operations that are going on and making sure we're operating in a safe manner. For this particular incident, that is Rhonda Rosati. She's our EMS coordinator for the fire department here. And she has been invaluable in this response to make sure that we're meeting the standards that we need to and that we're providing the best service for the citizens there. You'll see we have a PIO in that command staff. That's our public information officer. And for this incident, Anissa is a person who she's running that role right there. And it's that role is invaluable also as far as getting out information to the citizens, getting out our social media information, and also taking in that information from the state, local, federal level, making sure that we're getting out a consistent message. You'll see liaison there. Liaison is basically a person that acts as a go-between for any other agencies or services in our city. So a big one on this is going to be our skilled nursing facilities, or our homeless coordinators, or the hospitals, things like that, that we have a liaison of resources in our city, or people that are going to be affected, and we have someone that we can directly talk to help us out with that. Under that, you'll see the 4 sections. It's basically that's where basically all of the work is going to get done as far as operations. The operations section for this incident, we had the fire branch, which for the sake of this incident was responding to the medical aids or any big outbreaks that we're going to have. We had the police branch, which was to handle any type of police matters that we may have related to this incident. One of the big sections of this was our community service branch. Very early on, we recognized the fact that we needed to maintain, with the shelter in place of some of our senior citizens, we needed to make sure that we were getting meals delivered, making sure that we were meeting all the needs of any of those special interest groups in our city, so that we can maintain and provide those services to our citizens. So, and then we had a homeless division that was working under there to deal with any of our homeless population, to make sure they're getting the services, sheltering that we needed, and coordinating all those activities. And then the other section under there would be our infrastructure branch, which is also very important. That's maintaining that we have water going to our houses, we have sewer, we're maintaining the streets, we're maintaining all of that infrastructure for the city, so that the citizens have those critical services taken care of. So that was a major part of our operations. The finance section is basically takes care of all of our timekeeping, helping out with. They've been tasked heavily in this incident with all of our grants that we're able to receive, with any type of federal funding, anything like that. So a very large portion of this incident, that finance portion, is very, very important because of the financial impacts of this incident. Logistics is basically our supply for the whole incident. They make sure that all of our masks, goggles, hand sanitizer, all of the supplies for the people in the city to maintain their work. That's where that logistics section comes in. And then planning. Planning is make sure that we're taking in all the reports on what's expected to come up in the future, and that we're building up our resources to be able to respond to those. So that's just a quick overview. I know that's a lot of stuff to digest right there, but that is basically the main structure of the EOC for this incident. Go ahead and move to the next one. One of the unique things that happened with this incident was that a typical EOC activation is where we would go to an EOC, a room where we would all be able to sit in a room together and make these decisions. That's the typical EOC. And that picture you're seeing there is our EOC where we had started, but very quickly realized that with the social distancing orders, and us being able to maintain that within a day of opening our EOC, we basically went to all web-based. This is what you could see on the right-hand side of your screen there. And just like we're doing tonight, many of our meetings or all of our meetings were over this platform, such as we're using tonight, where we just discuss things here, made those decisions. So it was a little bit of a different activation from what we're normally used to. But we recognized that right off the bat, that we didn't want our major the decision makers to wind up coming down. We had to make sure we protected ourselves too in making these decisions and maintain that social distancing. So, okay, next slide. So with the basically with pandemics, this is my first, I know, responding to something in this category here, but a very challenging response. It becomes a logistical. Some of the challenges for logistics were huge to try to maintain those supplies. Very early on, it was hard to come by masks, N95 masks, that were required for our first responders, the police, and also for public works, all the essential workers, and getting them those supplies they needed. That was a major focus of our first few weeks of this EOC activation, was trying to build a cache of equipment to protect our employees so they could still keep maintaining the services to the citizen. The big impact also is going to be the financial impact, and all of the work that goes into making sure that we're capturing any type of assistance that we can to assist us in that recovery phase once we get there, which we're just starting to get into there now. The changes in operations is very early in this pandemic. We realized that we needed to protect our employees, and we thought we could do that by working from home, working in shifts. So every department head had to come up with dynamic ways to still deliver our services, but find ways that we could protect our employees by either working at home, or so that we didn't have employees all congregated in one area. So there was a lot of changes that happened there. We worked through it, and we were able to get, I think we did very well in that category there. Okay, next slide. So just like I talked about on the previous slide, from the beginning of this incident, city leadership we've made adjustments and operations throughout all of our departments to maintain the critical services to the citizens and provide a safe work environment for the employees. So that happened through the social distancing, working from home, PPE supplies, changing the way we delivered our services, and we'll cover that. Each department head's going to cover that and how they changed up their responses or their service delivery during this incident. And also with that, now moving into this recovery phase, we're basically is maintaining the vigilance and pursuing any financial aid that we can to assist us in the recovery from this incident, so that we come out on the other side, as healthy, if not better than what we were. So that's a main concern for us, and what we're moving forward with now. So next slide. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the fire department, and that's going to be Deputy Chief of Operations Jamie Newton.
Thanks, Chief Coatney. Good evening, everybody out there. Jamie Newton, I'm the operations chief of the fire department. That just means I'm in charge of the day-to-day operations of the department, and pretty impacted by this virus. So tonight I'm just going to give you a brief review of the fire department's response to the COVID pandemic/crisis. Next slide, please. Real briefly here, this is just kind of the fire department response timeline. I'll just kind of hit some of the bigger items here, but it starts on March 2nd. We actually did respond to COVID-19 calls prior to March 2nd, but kind of at that beginning of March is when it kind of escalated for us, and we started making adjustments to it. So March 2nd, our dispatch center, which is MetroNet, began pre-screening patients. So when they would call on 911, they would be pre-screening. If they met the criteria for a possible COVID exposure or positive, our units would be flagged, and a precaution would be given to them so that they would arrive and take those extra steps to be safe. On March 5th, we realized that we wanted to eliminate or reduce the exposures our firefighters face. So typically in Fullerton, we have 4 people on our apparatus. And so we didn't want to, and we usually send all 4 of those people into a house or an area for a call. Well, we wanted to reduce that. So we said, hey, from now on, let's do a 2-in, 2-out policy. So 2 guys would suit up in their personal protective equipment. They would go inside, while the 2 guys outside would be ready to go in, but maintain that distance just to try to eliminate any additional exposures. On March 12th, we kind of recognized that we needed to eliminate any outside exposures to us. So we postponed any station tours and public educational events. And that's a pretty big deal for us, because we do like to get out in the community and meet with our people and with the citizens. And so that was kind of a big deal for us to stop that. As others have said, March 16th, we opened up that EOC. And so it was kind of help us coordinate our services here in town. On March 23rd, kind of forecasting the potential for a reduction in PPE or that personal protective equipment. And I'll keep saying that it's PPE or personal protective equipment. So we were kind of forecasting that there would be a potential a reduction of those things. So we said, hey, to now on, even to further reduce those exposures, instead of sending 2 guys into the house, we were going to send 1 in. So we went to a 1 in, 3 out model. And again, that was just to kind of conserve our PPE and also to limit the exposures. In the stations on March 24th, when the relief crews were coming in to relieve the off-going crews, we did a voluntary temperature check. We also asked some questions. It was all voluntary. Have you had any, flu-like symptoms or any of those kind of things? And basically, we didn't want to bring outside contaminants into the station or even people who have potential symptoms into the station. So we even started voluntarily taking temperatures for our own people. And on April 6th, we began really more detailed cleaning of our stations and our apparatus. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on a later slide. And then since April 6th, we've kind of just been doing the status quo. We're doing the same things. Nothing's really changed. We're still on guard and still trying to protect our people. Next slide, please. Okay. So obviously, the fire department's focus or mission is to deliver emergency services to our citizens and to the community. So some of our concerns or challenges were, how are we going to deliver these services during a pandemic? Obviously, this is the first pandemic. I've been on the job for 29 and a half years, and this is the first pandemic I've had to face. So how do we deliver those services to our community? On the slide here, you said, how do we keep our people safe? So that was a major concern for us. So how do we keep our workforce healthy and able to come in and provide services to the community? So that was a very important concern for us. The second bullet point there is, how do we keep our firefighters' families safe? We recognize that if a firefighter was worried about their family at home and their safety at home, then they weren't focusing at work, and that could be bad. So we wanted to make sure that we took care of our firefighters' families, right? Also, if a family member happened to get sick, there's a good chance that firefighter would stay home to take care of them. And now we're losing our workforce. And so that's just compounded that concern for us. And then the third bullet point there is, how would we maintain services to the community if a large part of our department was sick and at home? So we had to kind of come up with some contingency plans for that. Next slide, please. So one of our first ways to keep our people safe is that we increased our levels of PPE. Next slide. So you see there, we have our firefighter prior to the COVID-19. Typically, the firefighter would be wearing gloves and possible goggles or safety glasses when he went on a medical aid. With the start of the COVID-19, then we had to increase our levels of PPE there. Initially, the firefighters would go in with a goggles and an N95 mask, a gown, and gloves. And then later on, we were able to secure these half-face respirators and then face shields. And so the added bonus to that face shield was that it actually provided better protection for our firefighters. And it also reduced our need and our use of the N95 mask. So the N95s were going kind of fast. And so by using these respirators, we kind of slowed down the use of that. So that was a great added benefit to the N95 mask. Next slide, please. And an additional way to keep our people safe is that we wanted to practice social distancing in the stations. Next slide. So all of our, obviously, we live in the station for 48 hours in a row. And so those stations can get very tiny with 4 people inside there. So we wanted to make sure that we were protected inside the station. So we developed this flyer and sent it out to all the stations. We have a couple of comedians here that helped us with the slide. We'll point those out to you. But basically, we wanted to make sure that they maintained that 6 feet of separation, that if possible, they would eat in shifts, exercise in shifts. We encourage them to continuously to wash the bedding and to clean up after every use. And the one firefighter there in the center to the right is washing down some workout equipment. But we also encourage them, those high touch surfaces that we want to make sure they cleaned. And over there in the bottom right, there's a firefighter cleaning a ping pong ball and paddle. So comedians, I guess, huh? Next slide, please. And then a concern too is another way to keep our people safe was the station and apparatus cleaning and decontamination. Next slide. So in order to keep our stations and apparatus clean, we had to step up our cleaning regimens. We normally do a station cleaning, but we had to step up our game in that area. We did have a commercial service initially come in and start doing some deep cleaning of our stations and of our apparatus. They did that on a weekly basis. We had to make a policy change on our uniforms. And that's kind of a hard thing for us because we're kind of a traditional service. We like our guys to be in uniforms. And so we had to make a policy change on that. And we allowed our firefighters to go to a BDU pant and a t-shirt to respond to calls. And as a traditional guy, that was very hard to get past, but we had to do it for our own safety. And so basically what that did was it made it easier for when these guys came back from a call to be able to take off that outer layer and to leave it outside the station so they weren't bringing those contaminants into the station. And so that's why if you've driven by any of our fire stations, you'll see our guys walking around and basically it's PT gear. And you know, as a chief officer, to see somebody at 3 o'clock in PT gear is a little unsettling. So we had to do that though. So it's for our own protection. And with the innovation of our firefighters, we were able to eliminate the station cleaning, and we just maintained the apparatus cleaning from an outside company. And that was because the apparatus are exposed more, have more exposures to any contaminants. Like they're out there every single call. You know, we're bringing our equipment back to the apparatus, and so we wanted to make sure that we maintain that on the apparatus. Next slide, please. So you'll see there, and I talked earlier about the ingenuity of our firefighters. We have here as one of our captains developed this cleaning system for us, and he's on his back there. He's wearing our self-contained breathing apparatus, and that's what we normally wear into a fire or to a hazardous materials incident. So what he was able to do is that he took our SCBA and attached a cleaning hose system to it and was able to spray a disinfectant with it. And so by using this sprayer, he was able to, basically stretch out our disinfectant. It produced such a fine spray that we were able to use less disinfectant and cover more area. So ingenuity, it was pretty awesome that he developed that. We quickly went out and bought a set for each station. So our crews were able to clean the stations the apparatus very quickly. Next slide, please. And then another way that we were able to provide safety for our family was that our Metronet began pre-screening the patients, like I talked about in the timeline. So since March 1, Metronet has issued 464 enhanced precautionary warnings to our crews. And that since March 1st, our paramedics have escorted a total of 12 positive patients to the hospital. So out of those 464 precautionary warnings, 12 of those were actually positives. We've also red flagged, if you will, 3 skilled nursing facilities in town where they are known to have either staff or patients that have tested positive. So anytime we go on a call there, our crews are notified and they can wear those PPEs early. Next slide. I was late on that one. Okay, so one more slide, please. So how do we keep our firefighters' families safe? How do we prevent our guys from taking home any contaminants to their families? And so what we did is we instituted a rule where no firefighters were allowed to take their uniforms home to be laundered. It's kind of a tradition, at least here in Fullerton, where especially our rookie firefighters, They would typically show up to work in uniform and go home in uniform. And it's kind of way, hey, we're ready to work. And so we had to say, hey, we're going to let tradition go in order to keep everybody safe. So we didn't want them to, the firefighters to take these possibly contaminated clothing home to their family. So that's what we instituted. And again, a very traditional based service. And we had to kind of let that go for a little bit. Next slide, please. And then one of our final concerns was, again, how do we maintain services if a large segment of our department was sick? And so the first bullet point there is, if we had one or two firefighters that were sick, we would just fill with our normal staffing procedures, what we do from day to day. As those vacancies occurred, then we would convert from it says 4-0 staffing. So basically there's 4 people on every rig. We would then convert some of those units to a 3-0 staffing. So 3 firefighters per rig to make up for those short or sick firefighters. If it went beyond that, then we could actually deploy a squad. Basically, it would be a van or a pickup truck with 2 paramedics in there in place of an engine. Obviously, that's not what we would want to do, but in order to provide those EMS services in a district, we would have to do that. One of the things that we'd also do is we institute a strike team scheduling, and that's what we do on this scheduling is what we do on strike teams. So when we are deployed to a wildland fire, basically you go out for 14 days. You have days off in the middle, but you are still basically held by the incident. So you're not allowed to go home. They keep you there so that if they have to recall you, you're available instantly for recall. So we were talking about doing that. So basically we would have, we have the ability to staff our stations for 14 straight days by just maintaining control of those firefighters. And then the worst case scenario is that if we lost half of our department because of the illness, and we'd also assume that if it affected Fullerton, it would affect other surrounding agencies. So we decided that we would, in cooperation with those other agencies, we would combine our resources and to meet the regional needs. And so basically, we would kind of become one big department in order to meet the needs of the county, basically. And so that was our last resort. But it was exciting that, or not exciting, but it was very nice to know that we had that cooperation with our other firefighters, neighboring firefighters, that in a medical emergency, in a pandemic, that we could come together and become a functioning single organization. So that was very comforting for me. That's it for me. I'm going to turn it over now to Lieutenant Mike Hines from the police department. So Mike, take it away.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Jamie. I'm going to go over what the police department's reaction was to the entire pandemic. One of our biggest concerns was how are we going to maintain our mission and to keep the public safe while we're still taking care of ourselves and still doing the basic necessities for the city. Next slide, please. What we first did is we wanted to pretty much mitigate the interaction between the officers, just in case there was a contamination at our department. We didn't want the entire department being infected by it. So our first thing we did is we separated all personnel into platoons. We had A, B, and C squad, if you will, but we separated patrol into 2 different platoons, a day platoon and a night platoon. In addition, we also made a 3rd platoon, which is more or less a standby platoon. That was all of our investigations, plainclothes units, special units like our Community Services Bureau, our Traffic Bureau, but several other people. We wanted to keep 2 platoons basically in patrol only. Just in case there's an outbreak, we would have a 3rd unit available. So what we did is the day watch platoon, Monday through Sunday, we would have a single platoon only doing day watch. Night watch, same thing. If there was an infection or if there was an outbreak with any of the platoons, we would call in our reinforcements or at-home units, and they would become one of our patrol units. Luckily enough, we didn't have to deploy that, but that seemed to work. So with the 3 platoons, we were able to run everything sufficiently, maintain order in the city, and go from there. We did have to reduce some of our services, though, just based on exposures, and to mitigate once again the exposure to the pandemic. We didn't want to bring it into the station. So some of the department-wide decisions that were made to reduce the exposure by all the to the police department was the first thing we did was to close the front lobby. Obviously, we can't close it completely. There are still things that we have to do on a day-to-day basis at the front lobby. People that are arrested, people that store property with us, we have to be able to give them their property back. People whose vehicles get towed for whatever reasons, either private property impound or police impound, we have to give them their vehicles back. People still have to make reports. So what we did is we closed the front desk. We had most people contact police personnel, though, via phone. We have 2 phones to the entrance to the police department, and we still had the front desk staffed. When people came in, they needed property, they'd call on the phone, and we'd make arrangements there. If we had to do any kind of face-to-face contact with people at the front desk, we would equip ourselves in PPEs, keep them outside, and do everything from the front lobby area using the 6-foot separation. Same thing with vehicles, same thing with property, same thing with reports. If it was a low-level crime where it was a telephonic report that could be taken, let's say a petty theft or a identity theft, most of that was done by the phone, and it didn't necessitate a face-to-face contact. So that worked out pretty well. We're still doing that currently. We will be changing soon to open back up the front desk for limited services. Next thing we did is we suspended all volunteer programs. RSVPs, which are retired volunteer patrols. As you know, a lot of the retirees are the high risk age group. So we suspended all of that. We suspended our Explorer program. That's basically our junior police volunteers. Those are the age from 18 to 21. We suspended our chaplains, Chiefs Advisory Council, etc. A lot of the volunteer programs that were not necessary, we did suspend those. Those will be coming back online pretty soon. Another thing we did is we suspended all tours and civilian ride-alongs. Those were all postponed until after this pandemic is over. Community engagement events have been canceled or suspended until this is over as well. We have the pizza with the police. We have the coffee with the cop. We do a lot of school events. We do a lot of private parties, the neighborhood watch engagements. We suspended all of those as well. All face-to-face meetings that weren't critical, we encouraged any type of other medium besides face-to-face contact, either WebEx meetings, phone meetings, interviews, what have you. Visitations, dispatch, and records were all curtailed. What we did is we closed off each individual bureau to anybody from the outside. What we didn't want happening is one of our patrol officers delivering dinner, or a patrol officer could be possibly infected, having them go upstairs to dispatch, delivering dinner to dispatch, and then infecting dispatch. So what we did is we closed all bureaus, no further contact, and everybody in records or dispatch had to stay in records or dispatch. Any type of communication was done over phone or WebEx. In addition, any type of paperwork that was transferred to each bureau, we created mailboxes on the outside of each bureau entry, so there was never any face-to-face contact with anyone. We also have a gym at our department. We don't have any ping pong tables, sorry, Jamie. But our gym itself, though, was closed down because a lot of our patrol officers from the different shifts, day watch, night watch, or the investigations use it, and that would do the cross-contamination. So we did close down that, as you can see from my appearance right now. I've been at the gym in a couple months. But that's where we're at right now. We're looking at opening it back up soon when this pandemic permits. When it comes to response to calls, we don't have an option. We have to respond to calls. So what we did is we did minimum staffing with officers. On a general day watch shift, let's say we deploy 15 officers, we cut that down, usually about 20%, to field the calls that we could. At the beginning of this pandemic, we noticed that the calls for service weren't coming in as a great number as they usually are, just because the roads were empty, the stores were empty. So we didn't need as many officers out on the fields. And so the minimum staffing schedule worked. We also gave our officers, basically we told them to limit their contact with the public, use discretion on what type of law enforcement activities they're doing in the public. As you know, Fullerton is a very active department. Our officers pride themselves on doing pedestrian checks, business contacts, traffic enforcement, DUI enforcement. We basically told them if it's a public safety issue, we don't have an option. We have to enforce the law. We have to go and contact people. If it's something that, hey, this is a high crime area, I'm going to go contact everybody, bad guys, good guys, whoever, we told them use your discretion and try to limit the number of contacts, the proactive activity, if you will, of those officers. We also told them to use their discretion in responding to calls for service. Let's say it's a burglary call. We told the officers, do you need to do a face-to-face contact with the person inside of the residence if it's a burglary call? Some situations you have to, some situations we don't. So we encouraged our officers to use their department-issued cell phones to contact the victims or the reporting parties of these calls and see if they can do it over the phone to reduce the contact, the face-to-face contact with the people and the exposure to the inside of people's residence and their environments. All in-person briefings were suspended momentarily, and we used that time that the officers, usually it's about a 20 or 30-minute briefing every day, and that usually passes down what happened the night before. We suspended all that for the time being, and between shifts, we used that time to disinfect all of our vehicles. Our agency, we do not have enough vehicles, so every officer has their own personalized vehicle. We share vehicles. So for 20 to 30 minutes every day, we were using a lot of the disinfectant wipes, the disinfectant sprays, and we were meticulously cleaning all of our equipment prior to deploying for each day's shift. We have PSRs, which are police service representatives. Usually they're in the field taking reports. They're the non-sworn people that will take traffic collision reports, will do impound vehicles. We use them at the front desk because we knew that our call number at the front desk for reports over the phone would increase. So we moved them all inside and they were out of the field for the time being. We also reduced some of our service when it came to non-injury traffic collisions that were not blocking traffic and there's no signs of a crime, meaning the person was suspended, the person was intoxicated, hit and run, or anything like that. If it was more or less a fender bender, a non-injury traffic collision, we were encouraging all people to exchange information and deal with it with their insurance company. Another big thing that we had too, and it kind of goes along with the proactive activity, was the prisoners. We had gotten word from county jail that they were being very selective on who they were going to accept in the county jail. I don't know if you guys are aware, but Fullerton Police Department has a temporary holding facility jail where we process people, we fingerprint people, and if they're intoxicated, we're going to hold them for a couple hours. We can do that. If not, most of our inmates or most of our arrestees go straight to county jail and are booked and processed and left at their custody there. Because of the new rules that were established by the county, they were not accepting most of the nonviolent crimes. Most of your misdemeanors and most of your nonviolent felonies were cited and released. When it came to that, we were telling our officers, when you can, based on discretion or based on necessity, when you can, cite and release in the field. We did not want the exposure from the arrestees or the people committing the crimes. We didn't want the exposure of bringing them back to the station. So a lot of the crimes, let's say it was a misdemeanor possession of drugs or narcotics. We would take the drugs and narcotics, we'd look at as evidence, we'd do a field citation, which is in effect an arrest, and we'd give them a court date within 30 days. So we didn't have to put them in our car. We didn't have to take them back to the station and cite them out from there. And it limited our exposure. Another thing we did was we told the officers to use discretion in towing vehicles. Whenever we tow vehicles, we're obligated to go through the vehicle very meticulously and do an inventory search of it. When you go into somebody's personal space in their vehicle, it creates a huge red flag as to you can get infected by what they've touched, what they've where they're at most of the day. So when it comes to towing vehicles, we tried to reduce the number of tows that we did, and we would do mostly cite and release and have them park at a safe location. Or if it was, let's say, a suspended driver's license, we'd have a family member come and pick up the vehicle. So we wouldn't want to keep the vehicle there, but at the same time, though, we didn't want to be exposed to the inside of their vehicle. Another thing we did is we made all of our C platoon, which is the non-sworn, we told them that they should be on standby and patrol ready at any time of the day, which basically gave them an hour response time. Let's say we had an outbreak with day watch patrol. I would then be able to contact the C platoon and say, you guys have an hour to get in here. You have 6 officers or 8 officers, whoever it might be, and 1 hour you need to be patrol ready. We did not have to deploy that, but that was on the standby. Another thing we did too is a lot of our special details, gangs, narcotics, our directed enforcement team, our general investigations. We didn't just have them sit home at the standby. What we did is we assigned them cases. We assigned them individual laptop computers. So they would be actually case carrying detectives, clearing cases during this pandemic and lowering our queue of crimes. When we shut down the jail for limited exposure, we stopped all public jail visits. And we enhanced all of our symptom screening. So if there was a mandatory arrest that had to be made, let's say it was a felony no bail warrant or domestic violence or a violation of restraining order, some of the stuff that you can't release these people, or a misdemeanor is a drunk in public. If we go and find a person who's drunk in public and it's obviously unsafe they can't take care of themselves, something like that, we have to hold them until they're somewhat sober and able to take care of themselves and be released back to public. So if it wasn't an option of calling a family member or friend to take custody of them, we would have to hold them. So prior to taking them into our jail, we would do the screening. We would ask them all COVID-19 type questions. Have you had a cough? Are you sick? Do you have a fever? Have you been diagnosed with anything? And we also deployed the thermometers. So we would take temperatures of everybody coming in or out of our building. We also had thermometers, or the hands-free touchless thermometers for our officers. So if our officers were not feeling well, if our officers had an exposure, we'd be able to monitor them on a daily basis, on a voluntary basis, but we'd be able to monitor them to make sure that they're not infected and that they wouldn't expose anybody else in the department. Professional staff, some of our services, our range was closed temporarily. Usually we do monthly qualifications. Other agencies use our range. We suspended all of that because we didn't want cross-contamination with other officers and other agencies coming in. Going on, police work continued during the COVID-19. One thing that we did find is because we cut down with some of the proactive activity of our officers, our response times increased. So when we did have a priority 1 or priority 2 call, a family fight disturbance or a prowler, our officers, because they weren't doing a lot of the proactive activities, they were able to respond a lot quicker to the priority 1 and 2 calls. That's about all I have. And I'll stick around for questions towards the end.
Thank you, Tony, for switching the slide over. Administrative Services Department. Administrative Services continued its role as a support function to the organization by assuming the finance section responsibilities of the Emergency Operations Center. The finance unit is responsible for establishing a system to track and maintain financial and accounting records of the emergency, supporting documentation efforts to track all employee staff time spent on addressing the emergency, processing emergency-related workers' compensation claims, supporting purchasing efforts in coordination with the logistics section, and cost recovery and financial assistance. Next slide, please. Supporting the activities of the finance unit are the following areas of the Administrative Services Department. Fiscal Services has been supporting cost recovery efforts by working with the staff responsible for seeking reimbursement to ensure the tracking and reporting of costs supports reimbursement efforts. Fiscal Services has also been actively supporting the Community and Economic Development Department as they work with lessees who have been experiencing financial hardship. Human Resources, working with the Fiscal Services Division, established procedures for tracking staff time on addressing the emergency, implementing COVID-19 related legislation impacting the city's labor force, and processing workers' compensation claims. Purchasing has been working closely with the logistics unit to support best efforts to obtain supplies to address the health and safety needs of the public and the city staff. With the onset of the health crisis, the Revenue Division and Public Works Department stopped water shutoffs and has been working with customers experiencing financial hardship. As the city operates its utilities on a cost recovery basis, we cannot waive utility charges, but will continue to work with customers on a case-by-case basis to help them become current. Due to the fiscal impacts of COVID-19, both our residents and businesses, as well as on the city, the Revenue Division has been more actively monitoring collections of revenues and their impacts on the city's cash flow. The Budget Division assumed additional responsibilities to support cost recovery efforts by working with the Recovery Unit to ensure the City of Fullerton strives to receive all emergency assistance and disaster recovery costs for which it is eligible. This includes the FEMA Public Assistance Program and any other federal relief programs available to cities. Additionally, Budget in conjunction with the Revenue Division has been responsible for supporting efforts to identify the fiscal impacts, including forecasting of COVID-19. Next slide, please. Before I review the fiscal impacts of the health crisis has had on the city revenues, I would like to provide a brief overview of the city's major general fund revenue sources, which are property tax, sales tax, and transient occupancy tax. Property tax accounts for about 48% of the city's general fund revenue. Sales tax accounts for about 22%, and transient occupancy tax, which is the city's hotel tax, accounts for about 3% of the city's general fund revenues. Another area of note are the city's enterprise funds, which include the utility services the city provides to its residents and businesses. As mentioned earlier, these services operate on a cost recovery basis, so we have been encouraging our customers who are able to pay to do so, as the revenues are used to offset the cost of the services, as well as to support continued repair and maintenance, as well as capital improvement efforts. So now turning back to the slide on the screen, the first column represents fiscal year 1920 revenue estimates that are pre-COVID. The second column are the city's revised projections based on available information after the Safer at Home order was issued, and the third column represents the change between the first two columns. Property tax. There were initial concerns that the governor would defer payment of property taxes, which would have had significant impacts on the city's working capital. This did not occur, and property taxes actually came in slightly higher as they were based on assessments from the prior fiscal year. Thus, we are projecting property taxes for fiscal year 1920 to come in at about $45.6 million. Sales tax. COVID-19 and the resulting Safer at Home order, which became effective March 19th, has impacted many businesses within the city, which in turn has impacted consumer spending. Further, the governor has also created a sales tax deferral program for small businesses to provide some payment relief, which provides a 90-day extension of sales and use tax returns and payments for all businesses filing returns for less than $1 million in tax liability, thereby extending the date for businesses to remit the first quarter of 2020 sales taxes until July 31st. The sales tax deferral program, compounded with the decreased consumer spending, has had a negative impact on sales tax revenue. As a result, sales tax is projected to come in at about $20.6 million, which is $1.6 million less than anticipated pre-COVID-19. With businesses starting to reopen, we are hoping for a quick economic recovery. However, we know from past recessions that revenue recovery can be slow. Transient occupancy tax, or TOT, is assessed on hotel guests. With a significant drop in hotel occupancy rates, the city is anticipating a $1 million decline in TOT revenue. Also of note are declines in parks and recreation rentals and fees. As many of the parks and recreation facilities were closed, revenues correspondingly declined. The estimated impact to this revenue loss is about $750,000. Overall, the city is anticipating revenue loss of about $3.2 million for fiscal year end 1920. Next slide, please. On this slide, the first column represents the city's fiscal year 1920 budget, pre-COVID 2019. The second column represents the city's fiscal year 1920 budget, post-COVID-19. The third column represents preliminary post-COVID fiscal year 2021 budget projections, and the last column represents the revised post-COVID fiscal year 2021 budget estimates. As can be seen on the slide, the city has been using vacancy savings to balance its budgets. Fiscal year 1920 was no different, with the city utilizing vacancy savings of about $1.9 million to balance its 1920 budget. The estimated loss of revenue due to the fiscal impacts of the health crisis are resulting in a projected deficit of about $3.2 million. As the local economy reopens, we do not anticipate revenues to automatically bounce back to pre-COVID-19 levels, as it will take time for businesses to recover their customer base and subsequently rehire, and for consumers to begin spending again. In early May, the city projected a $9 million deficit for fiscal year 2021. As information became more readily available, we have revised our revenue estimates by about $1 million, thereby reducing the projected deficit to $8 million. Each department also reviewed its vacancies to identify what positions could be held vacant in fiscal year 2021. As a result of this review, the city identified about $3 million in vacancy savings, which will be used to partially close the $8 million deficit. Thus, the revised deficit net of vacancy savings is projected to be about $5 million. The city is a service organization. Therefore, the majority of its general fund costs are labor. Primarily 70% of the general fund expenditure budget is labor, of which the majority is police and fire. The salaries and benefits are negotiated with the employee bargaining groups. Thus, changes to salaries and benefit expenditures will take time to adjust. Based on the adjustment to revenue estimates, the city is projecting a deficit of about $5 million net of the $3 million in vacancy savings. So that's the end of my presentation. So Judy, I will now hand it over to Judy Booth, our library director.
Thank you, Ellis. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening so we can talk about many things that are happening in the city. And of course, I'm going to be talking about the library. So I would say about a little less than 2 weeks before we finally closed on March 18th, we instituted something we called closed stacks, which meant that, as you know, we have security guard at our library. He would control the number of people and having them socially distance them out of the library. We removed all the chairs because we didn't want anybody sitting down. We just wanted them to come and get what they needed and then head on out. We did do passports for a little while, but as international travel closed, that wasn't necessary anymore. And so in the adult area, people would socially distance themselves as they went to the librarian and ask for what they need. A staff member would go and get it in the shelving and bring it to them so they could check it out at their self-checks. And in children's, it seemed like they were doing a pretty good job of sticking with their families and socially distancing themselves, and with no chairs, they pretty much got their things and left as well. And so while we were closed, we had to reorganize ourselves, as many other places in the city did. And as you can imagine, our office spaces, like other office spaces, are set up for collaboration. That's how we work. We try to pool our ideas and get best practices on serving the public. And so we began to have various staff members telecommute and come in maybe 1 day per week to the office and kind of rotate that around so they could still deal with their collection, the physical collection, and then also work from home. And what we really increased was our online programming, because all of our in-library programming had to be curtailed. So if you go to YouTube with Fullerton Public Library, you'll see lots of what we've been doing. We have a great partnership with Pet Prescription for our Read with the Dogs, as well as lots of other ways to access library services. And of course, really transferring money that we would have spent on physical items to some degree to more digital resources, as you can see. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, and so you can see we made it even easier to get an electronic and e-card so that you could use our resources. And we have Overdrive and also Libby and RB Digital, which is magazines. And we have a lot of resources, as you can see. And let's go to the next slide. And then changing our operations. As I see, we have some of our staff telecommuting a few days a week and coming in on alternating days so that we can socially distance ourselves. But the big thing is our virtual story times. As you'll see, we've transformed the Osborne Auditorium into not only a place for us to quarantine our books, which we'll talk about in a bit, but also a place for our green screen and also to have our programming be filmed. So yes, one of the concerns we had was how fast all of our physical items returned to the library, and we are quarantining them for 3 days before they end up being shelved. We found that we are able to disinfect our sorter, which is very helpful because that lets us operate with a lot less staff than we otherwise would need. And we implemented curbside pickup. And even though we have not turned on our ability to hold, you can call the library and reserve books and pick them up. And could you go ahead and go to the next slide? And if you click, she's going to click on that first link, and we're going to find out how curbside pickups work. Is she clicking on the video? Okay, so while she's looking up, I think she's looking for the link to upload it. It's on YouTube, and it's on our website as well. And we really do hope that all of you will get out the word. I know there's lots of, I came up through the children's services part of the librarianship, and I know there's lots of parents, and as a mom of 4 grown kids, you need a lot of books to keep kids reading. So I hope that you'll take advantage of our services. When you call in, you don't need to know exactly what you need. You can tell us, oh, I have a 4-year-old that loves dinosaurs, and our staff will help you find those books and pull them for you.
Once your items are ready, one of our clerks will call you to schedule your pickup time. Your items will be safely packaged and checked out for your convenience. When you arrive for your scheduled pickup time, please pull into the curbside pickup area. Stay in your car and call it.
Hi, welcome to the Fullerton Public Library. I'm Judy, the library director, and although we can tell you've been enjoying our online services, we know you've also been wondering, how can we actually check out library materials that are inside the library? Well, this is how you do it.
To schedule a curbside pickup, please call the Fullerton Public Library at 714-738-6333 to speak with the clerk or librarian. Let us know what titles or subjects you'd like to check out, and we'll retrieve them for you. Once your items are ready, one of our clerks will call you to schedule your pickup time. Your items will be safely packaged and checked out for your convenience. When you arrive for your scheduled pickup time, please pull into the curbside pickup area. Stay in your car and call us. Make sure to have your library card or ID just in case we need to verify. If you have a trunk, please open it so that we may place your items in it, or we'll roll your items up to you. Please just wait for us to move 6 feet away. Now you're free to take your Fullerton Public Library curbside pickup home to enjoy. Thank you.
All right, and there you have it. That's how you can do curbside service, and I hope you will take advantage of that opportunity. And please call the library if you have questions. Again, the library books are not due, even though you had due dates when you check them out. They will all be due on June 30th. So we've got that to look forward to. Thank you. And now let's hear from Hugo Curiel of Parks and Recreation.
Well, thank you, Judy, and good evening, everyone. As you know, the closures of, there's been closures of many sorts as a result of the COVID-19. And as you can see from the 2 samples here, just on this first slide of our signs, we have had to do some partial closures and then some full closures. As you know, some of our facilities are very popular, and so while the council and city manager's office were trying to maintain some level of recreation, in some cases we needed to act a little bit more sternly to just ensure that we could keep the public safe. But over the course of the initial pandemic phase, we did keep some of these other facilities open, such as trails and parks that offered passive space so that people could continue to recreate. But unfortunately, at some point, we did have to shut some of these down. Next slide, please. In response, we had to modify our service to address the essential needs of the community, and we also had to redirect our resources in partnership with Fullerton Free Church. One of those needs that we needed to fulfill was our senior population. Through a variety of programs such as Meals on Wheels, grocery program, senior outreach, and activity packets, we were not only able to keep our senior community fed, we were also able to reach out to them through email, social media, and good old phone calls to ensure that they were okay, and that simply to say hello and make them feel like they were still part of the community, as some of that population did need to stay isolated and probably less agile and familiar with social media. So through Meals on Wheels, we were able to provide frozen meals and continue to deliver to seniors on a weekly basis, and we would deliver those meals about a week's worth of items. Through the grocery program, which is in partnership with Second Harvest Food Bank, we also did weekly distributions, and we mostly provided those through our drive-up services. But for those that were not able to drive up or were homebound, we also delivered those grocery meals through our Meals on Wheels. And we also did senior outreach, which basically was picking up the phone and calling seniors on a weekly basis. We've been able to do approximately over 300 calls a week. And again, just to make sure that our seniors are okay, and if there's any needs, to direct them to the resources that they would need. Along with all of these deliveries, our staff did some very creative things where they did activity packets, which basically were hard copies with lists of resources, Sudoku, crossword puzzles or coloring pages, mind puzzles, and things of that sort, including images of basic exercises, so that that senior population did not have to rely on social media or digital technology, but basically get a hard copy and be able to refer to a resource immediately. All of this we were able to accomplish through our partnership with Fullerton Free Church, and we've been able to access over 5,000 seniors with meals and groceries throughout this time. Next slide, please. And then, as you know, the city normally has two farmers markets, one of those on Wednesdays and one on Thursday. But due to the COVID needs and the concerns and partnering with the county to address the homeless concerns during this time, the Wednesday market, which was normally at Independence Park, was moved to the library parking lot on a temporary basis. We had a very good reception with this from our residents. These markets have been very well received, and they are serving a good purpose, giving residents options to purchase produce, bread, and other essential food items while distancing. Our regularly scheduled Thursday market, which has been pared down from its full-blown setup, has been able to offer the same essential items as well. Next page, please. And then through various remote outreach programs, the Parks and Rec staff continues to interact with our youth through curbside pickup of arts kits and those types of things, virtual gallery tours of our current exhibit at the museum, and just through remote interaction through the after-school district program. And also, staff continues to work with the city's youth partner leagues to modify the recreational model on a temporary basis. And so, because there are concerns of sports and the kind of a risk that could be had while having games or gatherings and such, for example, our Golden Hill Little League right now is coming up with alternative ways of keeping their kids active. And one of those things would be, like, for example, playing over the line. And that is, if you don't know what that is, that's essentially a game where you can have somebody hit the ball and have a few other people out in the field. And so these are ways that they could continue to practice their skills, get out there, have that sense of being still involved in sports, but while keeping distance. And I'm sure that all the other leagues as well, such as soccer and softball, and those are looking to do those creative ways of keeping their youth connected and engaged. Next slide, please. And last but not least, Feed Fullerton, which is a federally funded program that the city of Fullerton has specifically tailored to simultaneously assist our residents in need while giving our local residents the opportunity to ramp up their business. With this funding, the city will provide meal vouchers to qualifying residents. Residents will have several options of restaurants or food establishments from which they can choose to redeem their vouchers and get their meals. This program will address the hardships of the residents in need while providing a boost to the local restaurants. The program is currently being developed. Applications to both residents and the restaurants will be available within the next couple of weeks, with the overall goal of providing meals by the end of June. So with this, we look forward to, of course, bringing back as much normalcy as we can to our recreation community. And of course, we're gonna push that envelope, but we also have to adhere to some of those guidelines and our local conditions. But we'll keep pushing as much as we can. And so with that, thank you for your time. And at this time, I would like to turn it over to our Public Works Director, Meg McWee.
Thank you, Hugo, and thank you all for being here. If we were in an actual live event, I'd probably make you guys stand up and stretch a little. You guys have been paying attention for a really long time, and we appreciate it. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit about Public Works. We are responsible for infrastructure and also providing some essential services. And the chart there tells you a little bit about some of the divisions I'm going to tell you about. We have water system operations, sewer facilities maintenance, street and landscape engineering, and CIP equipment maintenance, and our airport operation. Next slide, please. So we did things similar to every other department. In terms of essential services, we established a phase-by-phase response plan. In the initial stages of the pandemic, we weren't certain what exactly would be open and what would be closed. So we had to figure out how do we provide those services on an ongoing basis. So we did a succession plan, and we looked at supply chains. We looked at if our staff members were to get ill, what would we do in terms of having the services continue to be provided? So we changed shifts, as did PD and fire. We went to 4-10 schedules. We staggered people, and we also looked at specialty skill sets and specialty areas where only a certain 1 or 2 individuals were able to provide that service. We made sure that they were not in contact with each other. We split up duties, and we also ended up trying to figure out what contractors would we have that could provide those services as if our own employees were not able to do that. We increased our sanitation measures for our employees as well as the public, and we worked with the EOC in terms of PPE, the personal protective equipment and supplies. And then we also met as a division, our own individual department, initially on a daily basis, while we phased people to telecommuting, while we split shifts, while we determined how we were going to respond to the crisis. And then it went to twice a week, and now we're to a weekly meeting because we're at this new normal. Next slide, please. So in terms of the Fullerton Airport, it is considered an emergency operation, so it stayed operational the entire time. So we had 24/7 fuel service, and we had our office and our operations staff work staggered schedules. The only thing that closed in terms of the airport was Wings Cafe. It was a restaurant and obviously required to close. It has now begun opening, so we're glad that they're reactivating their business. Next slide, please. Equipment maintenance and replacement. We had operations that needed to continue, as well as we support the other divisions within the city, police and fire. So we had to separate out our mechanics, and we again we began to sanitize equipment as it came in and also as it left to protect our employees. Next slide, please. Streets and landscape crew, personnel protective equipment, they utilized that, and we continued to perform our standard maintenance. We responded to potholes. We redirected crews to help in terms of closures, and also for our staffing model, we also, my goodness, I'm teaching and I forgot what I was saying. So let me get back to the slide. In terms of street sweeping, we did continue to offer that operation. We did postpone any kind of tickets that would occur in recognition that most people were now at home rather than out at their businesses. And we continue to do tree and median maintenance and tree inspections, ongoing but fairly limited. Next slide, please. Our water system operation, this is where we had to continue. We continue to read meters and we continue to do billing, but we at this moment have stopped our turnoffs. So that is not in process yet, in recognition again of the pandemic and the fact that people have potentially been impacted financially. We also staggered our work schedule so that we have to work together as crews to respond to leaks, but we don't necessarily have to respond every day in that crew situation. So we divided it up and did the preventative maintenance that could be done by single employees. Next slide, please. Oh, I'd like to mention something too, if you could go back for a second, on the water system operations. When you talk about supply chain, we realized typically in an earthquake or in an emergency response, you have pipelines break and you have a temporary interruption of service. In this case, we had to plan for supply chains that could be down for as long as 3 weeks to 4 weeks. And so we had to get enough chlorine on hand in order to treat our water. We had to make sure that we were activated with our import water connections, as well as our other supply, to make sure that we could always provide that water. Next slide, please. Sewer and facilities maintenance, similarly, we continue to provide that operation, continue to do our inspections and respond. And then for facilities maintenance, they actually had to do a lot of activities. They had to close, assist with the closure. They also have had to help to reestablish anything that infrastructure improvements, screens, guards, anything that needed to be done. Also activating the appropriate sanitizing and cleaning, making sure we have those contracts in place so that if we have anything occurring at our facilities, we have the ability to then clean it immediately to have our employees return to work and get those services again activated. Next slide, please. Trash and recycling continued. The only thing that was postponed was the bulky item pickup, but we did have recycling education continue, and in fact had online programs through Republic Services that were continuing. Next slide. In terms of essential work that needed to continue, we did have roadway projects that continued. We had storm drain projects that continued, water line replacement. We actually benefited in some ways from not having traffic on the street. We were able to extend hours a little bit longer, able to process those projects faster. We also continued to inspect and move forward on private development projects. And as much as the COVID-19 pandemic has obviously impacted us negatively, there have been some benefits to COVID. And I'm going to turn it over to Matt Folks from our Community and Economic Development that will talk more through kind of our partnership processes that have been changed and in many ways bettered through this process. Next slide.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Matt Folks. I'm the Community and Economic Development Director, and I also have Kelly Fritzl, who's my Deputy Director, who's going to be available to answer some questions at the end of the presentation. So in case you're wondering where you're at in the agenda, I have great news for you. I am the last department to present. So thanks for hanging in there as we've gone through all the different departments and gotten a lot of really good and really interesting information from each of them. I'm going to probably jump around a little bit in my presentation because I know a lot of this information has been presented before by the different departments. And so we'll just jump right into it here. When I was looking at putting together a slide, I couldn't help but always feel like this image of a roller coaster was coming to my mind because it's hard to believe that it was only January, February, just a few short months ago, and all that has happened both in the city of Fullerton and the world generally, just in the last few months really does start to feel like a roller coaster as you're going through it. So Tony, next slide. So Ken, city manager, went through a timeline during his presentation. And so I won't go through the various steps as we've kind of gone along the way. But one of the things that City Hall did pretty early on was go ahead and close down to members of the public. So our development services counter up here on the second floor of City Hall, which includes planning, building, as well as public works, stopped taking customers from the public. And so we had to very quickly change the way we handled all of our day-to-day activities from over 100 customers a day in the lobby to how we're going to continue to provide those services and keep those things going through some sort of online, phone, internet-based system. So we very, very quickly kind of retooled all of our processes from start to finish, from planning, building, inspections, as well as public works, shifted those to online services available by phone, as well as going back to good old-fashioned snail mail and having some stuff mailed into City Hall, and then we were mailing things back out to applicants so we could keep those services going. I'm proud to say that throughout this whole process, we have never stopped performing building inspections. However, we did quickly amend our process to keep our building inspectors safe. So they had enhanced safety equipment, the mask and the gloves, as well as the additional cleaning of the vehicles. We also stopped performing inspections of interior occupied spaces, but we did do some inside inspections as long as the area was open and unoccupied. And then we continued to do all of our exterior inspections. Our code enforcement staff did much the same thing. We transitioned very quickly to remote office places. And so they all have tablets and remote printers. And so we're able to do most of their work from their vehicles and did continue to perform those inspections of exterior throughout this entire process. Next slide, please. But what this really represented was an entire paradigm shift. So we had to take what for many, many years, decades, had been a paper-based system requiring in-person meetings and go to a complete online system in about a week. And so, next slide. Tony, next slide, please. So after my brain exploded, and some of my department managers' brains exploded, we quickly picked up all of those pieces of brain matter and got to work. And so in a matter of about a week, we converted all of our in-person meetings to Zoom or WebEx. And so those are in-person staff meetings went to Zoom or WebEx meetings. Our planning commission meetings went to WebEx. We do developer meetings on a bi-weekly basis. All of those meetings went to virtual online. Something that we had done on a very infrequent basis on the past suddenly became a day-to-day activity, and getting the equipment set up and all of the various staff members kind of familiar with the various systems was something that we did very, very quickly, a very steep learning curve. And so now I think everyone on my staff is comfortable, whether you're Zoom, WebEx, Microsoft Teams, there's a number of them out there. There's another RIMS program. If you have a virtual software, we have the ability to meet and talk to you. We also realized that we do need to continue to conduct inside inspections of buildings. And so we very quickly created a virtual building inspection program. It's sort of low tech, high tech in terms, we have a building inspector here in the office. He can receive a building inspection request for very simple permits, your water heaters, some internal plumbing things, electrical, and then can connect with the contractor or property owner, review photos or videos that are sent in of the specific areas that they need to look at. And then we can actually complete those inspections without ever having to step and foot inside your building. So that was really a positive thing and something we are looking to continue to do even as we do start doing more interior inspections, because it's efficient for our inspectors because they're not driving from location to location. And it's very helpful for the property owner because they can now start to schedule those inspections on their time as they're sending in the photos instead of having to be at their house during a specific period for the building inspector. We also had to send home about 40% of my staff. We have a number of shared office spaces here up here on the second floor where we couldn't really accomplish that social distancing. So we sent about half, just a little less than half, home to work from home offices. We provided them with the equipment as well as the VPN software to be able to remote back into the city's network. We forwarded phone systems so that when you call the planning counter line, a planner picks up the phone and you have no idea that they might be sitting in their pajamas in their home office as opposed to sitting at their desk here at City Hall. Tony, next slide. So also in my department, besides planning, building, and code enforcement, I also have economic development. And so as we do start to shift to this recovery phase of the pandemic, economic development is going to become more and more important as we try to help businesses, development, and different employers start to recover. So really quickly on in this pandemic process, and really quickly in this process means a matter of days because everything's moving so quickly, we realized that there was a lot of information coming down from the federal government, the state government, local business associations, businesses around the city, I mean, really top to bottom. And so we realized that one of the best ways we can help businesses as well as employees of those businesses is to really provide a central location for all of those resources. So where is a place where if you come to the city and you're looking for assistance and you're a business operator, we wanted to create one location. So we created this COVID-19 business resources and employee page. It's mostly just links to other websites. Again, we were trying to combine and bring all of those resources together in one place so that businesses weren't having to spend a great deal of time hunting around the various websites. They can come here and get the information they need to move forward. And you see we have an entire section for the Small Business Administration, as a lot of these grants and payment protection and small business loans were starting to come together. We also launched 2 local websites. We have the dinefullerton.com and buyinfullerton.com. These are websites that we purchased the domain names and launched very quickly. The Dine Fullerton was an ability for restaurants that were staying open with modified hours, takeout service, etc. They could contact us for free and we would advertise their restaurant on the Dine Fullerton. We would include the hours of operations. We would include special menus, special processes, and just really provide that other resource, again, centralizing how people could find out information here about Fullerton. The second phase, we launched the buyinfullerton.com, and this is really getting at those retailers in much the same way. So if you're a retailer and you've had to shift a lot of your business to online sales, or you're doing curbside pickup of online purchases, we're allowing you to advertise through the buyinfullerton.com. We'll advertise your business, your logo, your names, your information, again, to provide that centralized location for folks looking to get their retail open. We also created the logo here. You see it's Fullerton Local, shop it, buy it, so we can save it. And that's kind of the concept as we're developing all of these resources. We want to make sure that people that want to dine in Fullerton, that want to shop in Fullerton, are able to do so, obviously, in a safe way. Tony, next slide, please. So we have other things represented to economic development. The city council, as well as the city manager, have taken some actions to relax some of our parking and sign regulations, understanding that signage needs to be changing as people's business operations are changing. So those signs you see open for takeout or different ways to enter a parking lot or different places to pick up your food or retail. All of those typically require permits from the city. And we understand that during this time period, requiring those businesses to come in and get those banner permits or those A-frame sign permits really wasn't necessarily the highest priority. And so we focused on maintaining public safety, maintaining safe path of travel for those folks that are disabled, but really starting to kind of open up that process to allow businesses that are really kind of scrambling to figure out different ways to operate, to do so in a way that wasn't going to be restrictive from the city. We've also allowed some modified parking changes, again, accommodating those curbside pickup, the to-go, the curbside retail. Just recognizing that, you know, business activity is down, the parking demand is down, and so we want to provide those businesses and retailers an opportunity to re-envision those spaces in a way that works sort of during this new normal. And so I like this sign that says "Old ways won't open new doors." So we really started to kind of just open everything up and start thinking about all of these requirements in these new ways. That kind of leads into the next bullet point there. We have been working very hard over the last few weeks on outdoor dining and outdoor retail. As the governor and the county starts to open up dining for inside dining, we understand that occupancies are going to be reduced as people spread out within the dining room. And so being able to allow outdoor dining, people to move out into sidewalks, parking lots, out into those open space areas to provide additional space for people to still come and have a dine-in experience, but not necessarily be within the restaurant. And so the city council's provided some great direction. And I'm very proud of our public works department, fire department, and police department, and my department on very, very quickly coming up with very common sense approach to regulations, allowing a very simple, streamlined process. Again, ensuring that public safety, ensuring accessibility, and folks that are disabled are able to continue to enjoy these outdoor spaces, but doing so in a new way that, again, for government can be very challenging to move this quickly and this dynamically. But it's something that I think we've done really well here in Fullerton. And if you've been on that portion of Wilshire just west of Harbor, you see where we've actually closed down a portion of the street to allow that outdoor dining to really extend even beyond the alleyways and sidewalks, all the way out into the street for this temporary period. The city also received a good deal of money from the federal government through what's called the CARES Act. And so we took action pretty quickly to allocate those funds, getting them out to business through business assistance loans and grants. And so we're trying to target those businesses that maybe weren't able to receive the payment protection grants or weren't able to receive some of the other small business loans offered by the state and federal government, really targeting those micro businesses, those mom and pop businesses that are struggling to stay open or struggling to keep those 1 or 2 employees. Usually those are the businesses that are living there. They also live in Fullerton. They employ people that live in Fullerton. And so this business assistant grant and loan program is going to really target those, try to get some working capital so they can keep those employees or retain the employee or keep those doors open. As I mentioned earlier in the slides, we very quickly modified our public hearing and public input process. The Planning Commission, which is our major hearing body before the City Council for a lot of land use decisions, is now done all online via WebEx meetings, very similar to this. So we have all of our planning commissioners sitting in their living rooms and offices, but continuing to deliberate on land use decisions, issuing conditional use permits, approving development projects, and moving that development activity forward, which again is going to be part of that engine of economic recovery, as well as allowing for the public input through an e-comment process that our city clerk was very quick in incorporating into our Granicus system through the online. Lastly, I'll just touch on here, another component of the CARES Act program was some rental assistance. So the city already had what's called a tenant-based rental assistance program, TBRA for short, that we were using to help folks at the Rancho La Paz and Rancho Fullerton mobile home parks. We were able to utilize some of the CARES Act funding to further expand that program. We want to understand that rent is going to be a really challenging aspect for folks here moving forward, especially as we get into this economic recovery. And so being able to put a little bit more money into that rental assistance program was a really good thing for the folks that are going to be able to take advantage of that program. Tony, next slide, please. I had to put this slide up, number one, because I really wanted to find a way to use that awesome image of the young girl in the bottom right. But we were really kind of wondering over the last couple months, is it working? Are we being successful? Are we reaching these people? Are we keeping things going? And so when we got this email, and I blocked out some of the info, but when we got this email earlier in May from a applicant that was trying to do an addition to their home here in Fullerton, and we explained how we have changed all of our processes to allow the plan review, planning, as well as the permit issuance and inspection to all happen without ever having to come into City Hall. We're really happy, and we've gotten a number of emails like this, but I thought this one was really nice because it was a very concise statement about how Fullerton has been willing to change to make things work, and we've been very dynamic and nimble in trying to accommodate to the new normal. So next slide, please. New normal, what a perfect transition to this slide. So we're getting back to recovery. As you see around the community, certain retail establishments are starting to open up. The dining is starting to open up. We are seeing some businesses come back in. And so what will the new normal start to look like here in Fullerton? So next slide. Well, I'm very happy to say that we have modified the development services counter here on the second floor of City Hall. We've got some protective equipment up in place. So the images that you see here is actually our building permit counter. You can see we've got the protective guards that our facility staff did an amazing job of constructing and installing very, very quickly. The gentleman there is able to come in and pull a permit over the counter. And with our permit techs, you can see them kind of in the background again with the masks and gloves on, so making sure that they're safe. But there are certain permits that are just most efficient to pull in an in-person over-the-counter situation. And so in those limited cases where the most efficient process is really that face-to-face interaction and we're not able to do it better online, we want to make sure that that's still available. And so being able to start to slowly reopen City Hall and issue those in-person over-the-counter permits has been really a really fun thing to see happen. Next slide, please. As we're getting back out into the community, you will see business start to happen. As I had mentioned, our building inspectors never stopped performing inspections. Our code enforcement staff never stopped being able to do inspections, receive code enforcement complaints. And so we were still out there doing things, and we will continue to be out there, but we will be continuing to wear the masks, wear the gloves, do the enhanced cleaning of our vehicles and our equipment. We're asking customers and contractors and homeowners that we encounter out there to continue to provide that personal protective equipment for themselves as well, help keep all of us safe. But we are back out there in the community. You can see businesses starting to be available for curbside pickup, and we are starting to see some retail starting to open up. And this is just a free plug for Public Works down there in the bottom. Our Public Works staff did an excellent job of taking advantage of some of those reduced traffic and getting to work on some of those street projects. We really appreciate that. Next slide, please. So what are some of the lessons learned? So the image in the background is if you Google silver lining, apparently this is the image that comes up. So I had to put it in here. Some of the lessons that we learned in community and economic development that I think are probably applicable throughout Fullerton City Hall is that we learned that we're a lot more flexible than we thought. We have for many years used a paper-based in-person system, and we were always under the impression that that was the only way we could do it. And even though we knew that there was a paperless virtual environment, we never felt pushed to get there. And so when we were sort of forced into that new world, into that new normal, I was very impressed with my staff and other city staff at how quickly we were been able to adapt to that and continue to provide those services. We've also learned that remote working is viable for some positions. And so even as we reopen City Hall, I still have a couple of my staff that are continuing to work from home because they're actually more productive in a home environment as productive in a home environment as they were here in City Hall. And so where those shared offices don't provide that safety and those social distancing, we haven't missed a beat in terms of providing those really quality services to our customers, both internally and externally. I mentioned we do those development coordination meetings virtually. We found that developers that are coming from out of towns, LA, San Diego, Inland Empire, have actually appreciated the virtual meetings over the in-person meetings. And we've gotten a number of requests that even after City Hall opens and we're in that final phase and we're getting back to kind of the in-person meetings are allowed, there's been a request from a lot of those developers to continue to do those development coordination meetings virtually, because that means they don't have to get in their car, sit on the freeway, come into Fullerton, find a place to park. They can get online from their offices, wherever that may be, and talk to our planning, building, police, fire, public works, engineering, traffic, and water departments in a meeting that has many of the same information. We can share screens. So virtual is here to stay, at least in the community and economic development department, where it makes the most sense. Then lastly, we do want to continue to expand those online services. We have a number of building permits that you can receive online, and we have realized that there is a lot of opportunity to continue to expand the number of permits that can be received online. There's a statement that a director told me once that the best trip to City Hall is the one you don't have to take. And we've realized that that is not only possible, but is something that we are a lot closer to being able to implement than we had thought. And so even after we do start to reopen City Hall, we are going to continue to provide that really, really high quality virtual and online services and look to continue to expand those services, again, because where it's more efficient and effective, we want to be doing that to provide those to our customers. So those are just some of the lessons learned. And I think I'm last up, so I'm not sure who I'm introducing, whether it's Ken or Tony, but that was my last slide. And thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. I don't know about you, but this was a really great presentation and I learned so much. And I'm just so proud of all the work that everyone is doing here. I would like to open this up to Q&A. So if anyone has questions, we're happy to get those answered. I do see one that we received and Hugo, this would be directed to you. The question is, hi, I'm not sure who to direct this to, but I'm wondering about the day camp at Hillcrest Park. Was there a decision made to cancel that for the summer? And if so, are there any alternative recommendations that could be made? And this comes from Sean Murphy.
Hi, Sean Murphy. Thanks for your question. Great question. We are currently still monitoring the guidelines coming through. We have seen that from the state, they are looking to give some flexibility to some of these summer program classes. And we do at this point we do plan to have those programs. We feel that those are somewhat essential, and that as people go back to work and whatnot, we want to be able to provide some of those programs so that kids could recreate and also serve as some sort of a daycare. So in the next few days, we're going to get a little bit more information as to those guidelines and start to push some more information out with relation to registration and start dates.
Thank you so much, Hugo. The next question I have is for PD. Have we noticed a decrease in crime with the safer at home orders?
Thank you for the question. This is Bob Dunn, Chief of Police. Overall, violent crime is down. What we have noticed an uptick in is some of the thefts from vehicles when people have made their ways out to our trail spaces. They have left items of value sitting on the seats, and so we've seen a slight uptick in those. We did see a little bit of an uptick in domestic violence, about 13%. We kind of were monitoring that one closely because we anticipated that with people being in close proximity for longer periods of time, that might happen. The last area that we saw a fairly significant increase in, that we continued that investigation through this COVID-19 crisis, was in thefts or burglaries to homes. About 2 weeks ago, we ended up arresting a group of people that were involved in those, and that investigation continued throughout the entire COVID deployment, with 2 of our investigators doing a lion's share of that work. So there have been some areas where there was an uptick in crime, but overall, violent crime is down.
A couple, that's it. Thank you so much. And I'm seeing if we have any live questions from our in-person audience. So just hold 1 second.
Tony, this would have been the location to put in that Jeopardy hold music if you had.
Oh, that's good for next week, definitely.
Anytime you're on something, some smooth jazz or some Jeopardy, I think that would have been perfect here.
I got one question coming in, and here we go. It is for the Chief of Police. Is the city able to enforce the mask ordinance, particularly if it's a large number of people at a newly opened restaurant?
Is the city able to? The short answer is yes. What we have really tried to do throughout this entire pandemic was to enter these areas upon calls for service and educate the folks to what the city's proclamation says. And thus far, when we have gotten calls and responded out our officers, we have gotten compliance from those involved. We do it in a very formal way. So if you were to call, we'll use this as an example. If you were to call and say there's a restaurant where people are not wearing masks and they're in close proximity, we would go enter that establishment, talk to the management, let them know. We do have a contingent of masks that we have with our patrol officers, so we can help the businesses come into compliance and put others at ease that are there patronizing the business. And we let them know about the city's proclamation. We read it to them out loud on our body-worn cameras so that we put them on notice, essentially. And then we look to them to have that kind of enforcement within their business. And like I mentioned before, thus far we've had compliance. If you're referring to a specific incident, we would ask you to reach out to us, and we'd be certainly happy to look into it. So the short answer is yes, we can enforce it. The longer answer is it really has to be in context of the call for service. It's not something I can just blanketly answer that it can happen this way every single time. The other thing we have to consider too is reasonableness. If people are in a restaurant and they're properly social distanced and a family sitting at a table and they actually want to eat food there, then it's going to be really difficult to accomplish that with a mask on your face. But if they're really making efforts to adhere to the proclamation, then it's not something that we would immediately issue them a ticket for. We would work with them to explain some of the areas maybe that they could improve. And so that's how we would handle those.
Thank you so much. And lastly, our last question comes from Gretchen Cox. What will the process look like to determine how to distribute any CARES funds the city may get? And I'll turn this over to our city manager, Ken Domer.
Thank you for that. And thank you, Gretchen, for the question. As some people have read in the newspaper and online, the County Board of Supervisors right now is looking at how to divvy up some funding that they received from the CARES Act. Right now, cities have not received a direct allocation of CARES Act funding. And it's important to note that the CARES Act funding comes with a lot of criteria and eligibility requirements. So right now, the county has basically allocated about 26 million to all the cities combined for direct reimbursements of those things that we have expended that fall within the criteria. So if there's been police or fire overtime costs, cleaning supplies, the personal protective equipment, we can seek reimbursement from FEMA. FEMA is about 75%. So the county is providing some of their money for that 25% match, so we don't have to use our general funds. So we're very appreciative of that. That decision was just made 2 weeks ago. I have not received any direct information. I believe it's going to be based on a per capita, so by population amount. I don't know how much that means to us. Additionally, the county is looking at about $75 million. That's going to be split 15 million per supervisorial district, which will be for business assistance. I do know that Supervisor Doug Chase is looking to use the Small Business Development Corporation for those type of loans. So instead of directly giving it to the cities, it would go to the SBDC, and then cities that qualify within, or businesses that qualify within Fullerton would go to them. We're actually using the SBDC already for our CARES Act funding through the CDBG program. So we're good with that. We do believe it's going to help our businesses. There's one last federal, well, maybe one last, but there's CARES Act 2.0 or Phase 4 that is being discussed right now at the federal government. That could be money that could also be used for revenue loss. So again, you heard the Director of Administrative Services, Ellis Chang, talk about a $3 million hit to our revenues this current fiscal year, potentially up to $9 million or around there for next fiscal year. But we don't know how much money is in that, what the eligibility criteria is going to be. So it's not the best answer. I wish I had the facts right in front of me, but until we get a direct allocation, until we know exactly how we can expend it, don't know. But we're waiting for the county money. First of all, it will greatly help because we've had about $500,000 to $700,000, if not more, in direct COVID-related costs.
Thank you, Ken. And one final question that just came in is from Scott Hasselton. And sorry if I messed up your last name. His question is, first, thanks for all over the work and overall adaptability and otherwise uncomfortable ways of doing business. What I didn't see is what would seem to be a core component across all divisions was what the central role of the city's IT department is playing in supporting the response. It sounds like much of the digital adoptions were done in an ad hoc manner. Can anyone speak to IT's role in supporting the different divisions?
I'm going to let the chief take that, but IT was absolutely instrumental in our ability to handle this crisis. And as people know, we've had some IT issues here. Had we not our current contract provider, Glassbox, we would have been floating dead in the water during this crisis. And hats off to them. But Chief Dunn, can you go ahead and talk about some of the stuff they've done for us?
Yes, sir. So for those of you who don't know, currently in the city of Fullerton, the police chief oversees the IT for the city of Fullerton. And so when this pandemic struck, they were an integral part of our response. As the city manager mentioned in the very beginning of this presentation, when we went to our kind of established EOC, we realized that there was some additional IT needs that made it not a viable option for us to use that location. So over the course of a weekend, our IT vendor, myself, and some other key personnel came in and stood up an EOC in the basement of our city hall. We also undertook what was kind of a monumental task, if you ask me. This, previously, and I think all the directors have touched on it, Fullerton has prided itself on being an in-person, engaging city, providing services to our residents. However, we then needed to transition to having our employees be just as helpful remotely. And in a city that had not previously adopted that, it was kind of yeoman's work that needed to be done to ensure that our employees could work remotely safely. And when I say safely, safeguarding the systems of the city and people's personal information, et cetera. And so they basically stepped up to the plate and for us transitioned over 150 employees in the course of about 1 week to working from home. And I think they did a fantastic job. We currently have a service provider in our department is run kind of in a hybrid way. We have some city employees and then we have some contractors. And right now we are going through a phased IT upgrade. And so we're in phase 1 of that now. And then our plan will be to transition the current provider who is here simply to get us on the path to success, phase them out, and then bring in additional employees. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much, Chief. And that wraps up our questions and our session tonight. I hope you enjoyed learning everything that we've done in response to COVID-19. We'll see you back here next week for the overview of the city manager's office, the administration, our city clerk, and our legislative advocacy efforts. If you have any questions in the interim during the week, you can direct them to myself or to Anissa Levis, who's been in contact with you on the logistics of this program. So thank you very much.
Thank you.